Hello and welcome. You're watching Nothing But the Truth. It might be bizarre that nearly 70 years after independence, we're still asking the question, what is anti-national? By now you would have thought we'd be confident of the answer, but clearly we're not. So this is one of the key issues I shall raise today with one of India's greatest lawyers, former law minister and the lawyer who got Kanhaiya Kumar bail, Kapil Sibal. Mr. Sibal, let's start with the question of anti-nationalism before we widen the discussion. Do you accept that anti-national is a term that's not defined in Indian law, and more importantly, even colloquially, there isn't agreement about what is anti-national? One man's anti-national could be perfectly acceptable to another person.
Oh, absolutely. And civilization, the march of civilization has shown that. I mean, if you look at the history of the world, you will find the patriots in the Spanish Civil War who were supporting Franco, and the loyalists on the other side, who was national and who was anti-national.
Absolutely. In fact, writing in the Indian Express on the 17th of February, Fali Nariman says that it might be distasteful, it might even be morally offensive to be anti-Indian, but it is not a criminal offense, and it is definitely not sedition. Do you agree with Mr. Nariman?
I entirely agree. I entirely agree. I mean, you may dislike what somebody else has said. That's perfectly valid. You may not agree with what somebody else has said, but saying something cannot possibly amount to sedition.
So just to sum up for the layman, there is no such thing as an anti-national crime. The penal code does not have a crime called anti-national behavior.
Not at all, because it's a matter of perception. You cannot mandate what is national and what is anti-national, what is nationalistic and what is anti-national.
So this is very important. Anti-national is not a crime as defined by the penal code.
Not at all. But they may, I mean, for example, if you evoke communal feelings, is that not anti-national? But that's a crime.
But that's a different thing.
Yes, exactly. So
the very definition anti-national is undefined in law.
Absolutely.
It's not a crime.
Absolutely.
Let's then, with that background in mind, come to certain test cases to see where you stand on those. To begin with, is it anti-national to criticize the Supreme Court for its decision to hang Afzal Guru or Yaqub Memon?
Well, let's look at it this way. When the judgment came in the emergency case, remember ADM Jabalpur judgment came, I think most lawyers after a while criticized it, in the strongest possible terms. Was that anti-national? The answer is no, because I think the judgment was clearly wrong.
So if you can criticize the Supreme Court in the case of the Jabalpur judgment,
yes,
then clearly you can criticize the Supreme Court in the case of its decision to hang Afzal Guru or Yaqub Memon.
The point is, an individual can have a point of view, and he's entitled to have that point of view, and the majority of the people may disagree with it.
And it flows from this, does it not, that the Supreme Court is supreme only because it's final,
Absolutely.
Not because it is always correct.
But many a times it is not correct, and the Supreme Court has reviewed this judgment on several occasions, admitting the fact that it's not correct.
So once again, just so that there's clarity, criticizing the Supreme Court's decision to hang Afzal Guru or Yaqub Memon is not anti-national.
Absolutely. You can criticize a judgment, you can't attribute motives to the judges.
You can criticize but not attribute motives, and also you can criticize a judgment, but nonetheless you are bound by the judgment.
Absolutely. Take, for example, the Bhular case in the Supreme Court. There was a hue and cry in Punjab. The Akali government said that Bhular should capital punishment should not be imposed on Bhular. Ultimately, life sentence was imposed.
Let's come to something else. Is it anti-national to demand or even campaign peacefully for secession? And before you answer, let me remind you that on the 1st of May 1962, C.N. Annadurai, in his maiden speech in the Rajya Sabha, called for self-determination for Dravidians. He called for a separate South Indian country. So I repeat my question, is it anti-national to call or campaign peacefully for secession?
Well, look at it this way. The JKLF, the separatists in Kashmir, are in a sense demanding that. Has the present government put them inside for sedition or are under any law?
In fact, you can extend that argument in the West. The Scottish nationalists in Britain have campaigned for secession.
Yes, in Spain.
The Catalans.
The Catalans in
Spain. The Parti Québécois in Canada.
Québécois in Canada, in France.
And all of these are very respected. No one would deem them anti-national, and yet they're campaigning for secession.
Well, somebody may term, because it's your definition of what is national, so you may term them anti-national, but it's not an offense. You know
what I mean? It's not an offense.
That the point is not that. You may call them anti-national because your perception of who is national or anti-national is yours. So you can, from your point of view, call them anti-national, but unless it is termed as an offense, because it's impossible to define what is national and what is anti-national.
Let's come at this point to some of the slogans that were allegedly heard in Jawaharlal Nehru University. I want to ask you where you stand on those. To begin with, is it anti-national to shout Pakistan Zindabad? Is it anti-national to call for Azadi for Kashmir?
First of all, let's put it, as I said, calling for Azadi for Kashmir has happened in Kashmir. And the people who actually were calling for Azadi in JNU admittedly were people from outside, perhaps from Kashmir, I don't know. But none of those people have been detained for sedition. In fact, none of those people have even been caught.
That I understand.
So therefore, let's leave that aside. At the moment, we're talking about people who are being sought to be prosecuted.
Well, no, I'm at the moment actually talking to you about whether those slogans are anti-national. I'll come to the prosecution later.
All right.
First, I want to understand
my position is that if somebody is asking for Azadi, right, from the point of view of a person who disagrees with it, it can be anti-national. But from the point of view of the person who is shouting that slogan, he may believe that he wants to be part of the Indian Union, but he wants some kind of space.
Let me ask you now, legally, if I understand correctly, the Supreme Court in the Balwant Singh case of 1995 eventually ruled that to shout Khalistan Zindabad was not a crime, it wasn't sedition. Ipso facto, to say Pakistan Zindabad can't be a crime, it can't be sedition.
You see, sedition by itself as an offense involves snogleering with incitement for violence. That's the definition.
So if slogans calling for Azadi in Kashmir and JNU, provided they happened, slogans calling for Pakistan Zindabad happen without any incitement to violence, they're not a crime. They may be offensive, but they're not a crime.
They may be offensive. They may also be, from some points of view, anti-national for those who consider them to be anti-national.
But they're not a crime under the penal code.
It's not a crime. For example, somebody cannot say, if I had a gun, one of the MLAs said, if I had a gun, I'd shoot these people. And some very responsible ministers have said that these people are traitors, right? Now, you may call them traitors, but being a traitor is not an offense. It's your perception of what you stand for as against those what others stand for.
The important thing is what you said a moment ago. I want to emphasize it for the audience. It may be offensive. Some people may consider it anti-national to say Pakistan Zindabad or Azadi for Kashmir, but it is not a crime.
It's not a crime, yes. Because
that's the important thing. It is not a crime.
Unless you incite violence, unless you incite communal tensions, unless you do some other things, you may gather arms, then perhaps it may be a crime.
Let's go one step further. What about slogans like Kashmir ki azadi tak, Bharat ki barbadi tak, jang ladenge, and Bharat tere tukde honge, inshallah, inshallah.
It's very distasteful. I mean, the slogans are exceptionally distasteful. But if you were to prosecute somebody under the penal code, you will have to find a section to do it.
And you can't think of one?
Why? I mean, if the prosecution has to think of one, I'm not here to prosecute.
But it's not an easy section to think of.
It's not easy.
In other words,
unless it's combined with some actual act.
On their own, without an incitement to violence, without being combined with some actual act, these slogans may be offensive and distasteful.
They are totally distasteful, unacceptable, shouldn't have been shouted
But they are not criminal.
But yes, it's difficult to say that they are criminal unless the prosecutor feels that some provision of the penal code has been violated. And I doubt if that's possible unless some overt act over and above slogans is shouted.
That is all crystal clear. That is all crystal clear. Let me then put this to you. India is not America, it's not the European Union countries. We are a different country. Even if legally these slogans don't cross a legal red line, for the majority they cross a moral red line.
Absolutely.
When they are then shouted at a university or outside a university, how should the authorities handle it?
The universities should actually pull them up and take action against them.
Is it for the universities or the government?
It's for the university.
Not the government.
Because university is a private space, it's not a public space.
So it's not for the government to intervene?
No, I don't think so.
The university should pull them up, you said?
Pull them up, take action, show cause notice. Why are you doing this? This is not the place where you should be doing this.
But again, this is all short of criminal action.
Unless you attract a particular provision of the penal code.
So the university should handle it with a certain measure of thoughtfulness and discretion, if I can correctly interpret what you're saying.
Because it's exceptionally distasteful to say the kind of things that they say.
But not criminal action, that isn't warranted unless there's incitement to violence as well.
It will be warranted if over and above what they did, there are some proactive acts, some overt acts that can be established, which may attract some provisions of the penal
But in the absence of that, criminal action is not warranted.
In the absence of that, it's for the prosecutor to decide. I cannot say because I'm not sort of looking at it from that.
Let's now come to the conditions laid down by Justice Pratibha Rani when she gave bail to Kanhaiya Kumar. You were the lawyer that got that bail for Kanhaiya Kumar. The judge laid down two conditions. Firstly, that he must not indulge actively or passively in any activity that can be termed as anti-national. And secondly, she said, as president of the JNU Students' Union, he will make all efforts to control anti-national activities in the campus. Now, speaking as his lawyer, are those conditions acceptable and justified, or are they unacceptable and uncalled for?
It would not be fair for me to really comment on that, for the simple reason I argued the case, the judge has made certain comments, it may go up in appeal, and it would not be fair of me to, except that I only say this, that the judge has held that there is no evidence on record that Kanhaiya actually shouted any of those slogans. Having said that, there was no need for anything else to be said.
Let me put to you a point made to me on our sister show, To the Point, by a former judge of the Supreme Court, Justice A.K. Ganguly. He said by linking as a condition Kanhaiya's bail to what happens in JNU, the judge has actually converted bail into something that is worse than jail, because now Kanhaiya can be held responsible for things he didn't do, even for things he didn't know had happened, just because they happened on the campus.
Well, you know, that Justice Ganguly's opinion, as I said, as a lawyer, I do not want to comment on it.
There's one other thing. In her bail order, Justice Pratibha Rani refers to anti-national activities as an infection. She at one point uses the word gangrene. Then she says that you might need surgical intervention, you might even need amputation. Now, once again, Justice Ganguly said that he believes this is an incitement to violence for the police. In other words, he says, who will do the surgical intervention, who will do the amputating but the police? The judge is inciting the police, in a sense, to take violent action.
Well, the judge may have a point of view, but I don't wish to comment on it.
You mentioned a moment ago that it's possible that you might go in appeal against these observations.
Not that I said. I said the matter may go up in appeal.
Do you think, in fact, it is advisable for the defense in this case to actually go to either the Supreme Court or at least the Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court to say these observations are unwarranted, they exceed the jurisdiction of the judge?
That's for the client to decide, not for the lawyer to advise.
So this will only happen if Kanhaiya wants to do it.
That's exactly the point.
Can I ask you, has he been consulted? More importantly, has he been advised? I say advised because he's a student, he's not a lawyer, he may need advice.
There are lots of, political activists, lots of very senior members of political parties who have been somewhat disturbed by those observations. And that's their opinion. And they have sought advice as to whether an appeal should be filed or not. But it's for the client to decide.
So this is a matter that is under consideration?
Well, I don't know. It's for the client to decide. But there are people who are very senior in politics and in the political establishment who have expressed some concern over what was said.
Let's take our discussion one step further. It's now established that at least 3 out of the 7 videos that purportedly presented evidence of Kanhaiya doing something that was distasteful or even criminal were doctored. Maybe all 7 of the 7 were doctored. Is there an onus or a duty on both the government and the police to investigate and establish who doctored the videos, and then to see whether action can be taken against them?
Actually, that's a very, very serious issue, and I'll tell you why. You see, what happens, at least in the modern world, especially with the communications revolution, a private conversation can be made into a public event. Supposing I and you are having a conversation which is purely private, and some third person records it, and then those two goes to a TV channel, and they put it out. So actually what may otherwise not be an offense is converted into a criminal act because of the breach of privacy. Because of a private conversation being put in the public domain. So in a sense, if you talk of sedition, let's take sedition. I have a private conversation with you, which was not supposed to be made public. A TV channel picks it up, puts it in the public domain. Quite frankly, it's the channel that has committed sedition.
Oh, this is very interesting. I'll come to the channels in a moment's time. First, let me limit my question to the doctoring of the videos.
That's forgery.
So action can be taken?
That's forgery. Because a snippet on TV is a document. So it's clear forgery.
And therefore there is an onus, I presume, on the government and the police to investigate who did it.
Absolutely.
And to take action.
Absolutely.
Now, so far as I know, the police have done nothing.
They will not.
But is that then not a lapse of duty on their part?
Absolutely. But do you expect this government to proceed against a TV channel that did that?
Don't you expect the police suo motu to proceed on their own?
Do you think police acts on its own?
So this is a case of deliberate lack of action.
It's a case of forgery. It's a case of inciting violence. It's a case of sedition.
All three.
If you consider the acts, the statements made by those 5 who came from outside as sedition, then those who propagated it on TV channels and morphed the videos
are equally guilty.
Are equally guilty.
Let's now come to the channels that chose to broadcast these videos without verifying them. In one instance, it's even alleged that the channel itself possibly doctored the video.
No, it's doctored because the voice, there's an overlay of the voice. It's obviously doctored. Now, who doctored it is the question.
Should, in fact, action be taken against the channels who broadcast these videos?
I don't know. All those who participated in the doctoring of that tape are liable to be prosecuted under the penal code.
That includes all those who spread the tape through broadcasting.
Absolutely.
Which means channels who broadcast it are liable for action.
Whoever did whatever he did has to be, is liable.
Well, once again, no action has been taken against those channels.
It will not be taken. You know that.
But it should be.
We know that. Of course it should be. Lots of things should be done, are not being done. You think that all the statements made by Sadhvi and made by Som and made by, Sharma, all that happened in Muzaffarnagar, the Dadri killing, the statements made, they are all prosecutable. But do you think anybody will take action? Remember this, Karan. We are nearing an election in UP. We are nearing an election in other states. All this is being done to polarize India.
Well, let's leave that aside. But the main point I want to underline is that there is a duty and responsibility on the government and the police, A, to establish who did the doctoring and to take action, at least on the grounds of forgery.
Absolutely.
Similarly,
Absolutely.
there is a duty and responsibility on the government and the police to take action against the channels that broadcast material that has added to the forgery and added to the potential sedition.
Channels may be responsible, may not be responsible, individuals may be responsible. I have no idea.
But it has to be investigated.
It has to be investigated.
Finally, let's come to 2 critiques put out by 2 leading members of this government. First, last Saturday, writing in the Economic Times, Venkaiah Naidu, the Urban Development Minister, said, and I'm quoting him, that what happened at JNU and Hyderabad University is a sinister plot to create confrontation within our society. He said the slogans were not meant to protest the death penalty, but a clear call for the disintegration of India.
I think that that's a very, very extreme comment. I don't think 5 people, even if they come from outside JMU, shouting slogans can disintegrate this great country. I think this great country is far too powerful to be disintegrated by slogan shouting of 5 individuals.
So paradoxically, by saying this, Venkaiah Naidu is actually not showing confidence in his own country.
No, I just think that he is upping the ante for political reasons.
Last Sunday, 24 hours after Venkaiah Naidu spoke, Arun Jaitley, the finance minister, said that this was a battle of ideologies which the BJP had won because students who had allegedly shouted anti-national slogans emerged from jail proclaiming Jai Hind and waving the flag.
Well, they always wave the flag. I don't think any of those students, in fact, it is at Nagpur that the Indian flag is not waved. In the universities,
but what about
any patriotic person would owe allegiance to the flag.
But the wider point Arun Jaitley made is that this is a battle of ideologies which the BJP has won.
No, it's not a battle of ideologies at all. In fact, what is ideological in this issue? You know what Rabindranath Tagore said? He said, patriotism is not my spiritual refuge. It is humanity which is my spiritual refuge. Patriotism is what you think, it is your perception of how patriotic you are or I am. It is, see, remember, we must owe allegiance to the Constitution. This Constitution Anybody who protects the Constitution is the true patriot.
Okay.
Anybody who disrespects the Constitution.
So you fundamentally disagree with Venkaiah Naidu and Arun Jaitley?
Because they disrespect the Constitution. The Constitution believes in the diversity of this country. The Constitution doesn't believe in a Hindu Rashtra. The Constitution doesn't believe in imposing your ideology on somebody else.
Let's then come in the limited time available to Kanhaiya Kumar himself. You met him, you were his lawyer, you secured bail for him at a time when many feared he might not get bail at all. He is today an icon, not just for tens of millions. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say he could be an icon for hundreds of millions of people. He's a star, yet he's only 28 and he's still a student. What is it about this young man that has become so attractive, that is attracting so much attention and sometimes even affection?
It's the angst of the young generation against the slow progress on issues that affect them and their future.
So it's not Kanhaiya Kumar, it's the fact that he represents something.
He represents the angst of a whole generation who are not getting jobs, 800 million people living in poverty, prices of dals at 200 rupees, and India sought to be divided on religious grounds.
And he's become the voice for all of this.
He represents the voice of those who are very, very shaken up by what's happening.
What about his personal qualities? The wicked, impish twinkle in his eyes,
no,
his capacity and
he has
flair
a great
for
sense
words,
of humor.
his humor,
Yes.
his oratory.
Yes.
How much has that added to the sensation he's become?
I think it is added greatly to the sensation that he has become.
Now, in the last 2 or 3 days, it's been revealed and confirmed that in June 2015, Kanhaiya Kumar was seen by a fellow lady student at JNU urinating in public on the campus, and when she admonished him, he was abusive and allegedly threatening in his response. She complained to the proctor, who then fined him 3,000 rupees. Does this, as his lawyer, diminish from his standing, or is it irrelevant?
Well, no, I don't think it's irrelevant. If he has done this, it's something.
Confirmed he's done it.
Well, it's something to be concerned about. But it doesn't take away from the fact that, as I said, Kanhaiya represents the angst of a whole generation. And the fact that this happened and he was fined doesn't take away from that angst.
Does it take away from his personal stardom, from his personal image?
That depends on the reaction of millions of young people.
And each person will have an individual and different reaction.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you another question. I know it's wrong to pee in public, but in India, practically every Indian has done it at some point of time or other.
I mean, if somebody does it, it's the reaction pursuant to that is complained of.
In other words, he should have apologized rather than threaten or be abusive in response.
If the facts are right, I don't know if the facts are right. You know, we normally go by what is put out in the public domain, and sometimes all of that is completely wrong. So I don't know what the facts are, but the mere act of peeing is one thing. What happened thereafter, and if it did happen, is another thing.
I'm going to end by coming to the point that I made in my introduction. Nearly 70 years after independence, is it bizarre, as I said in the introduction, that we're still questioning what is anti-national, what is not? Should we not by now have been confident about the answer rather than debate it as an issue?
Well, you know, Gandhi said it. Gandhi said, I am a patriot because I am humane. Any person who is not humane is not nationalistic and is not a patriot.
Can I put this to you? Today in India, we immediately brand those we disagree with as anti-national. Has the time come for us to accept that every Indian is equally patriotic and national?
Of course.
And this branding of those we disagree with as anti-national must cease.
See, nationalism has done a lot of harm to the world. In fact, if you look at the history of the world, you will find it's the nationalists who have perpetrated the worst crimes, whether the Inquisitions or Zionism or anti-Semitism. They have, I mean, the religious wars of the world. They are the ones who perpetrated.
You're saying a very important thing.
Chiang Kai-shek in 1927, you know, killed communists. The Cultural Revolution in China, where millions were killed, all in the name of nationalism.
You're saying a very important thing. Rather than champion nationalism as a virtue to be pursued, we should be wary of it.
Yes, and embrace humanity.
And embrace humanity.
That's
instead.
what we need to do.
All right, Kapil, Sibal, let's leave it there. A pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.